Claire Reynolds was only 3 paragraphs away from finishing the manuscript of a major publishing contract when she realized the problem. She was out of sugar. Drinking coffee without sugar at 10 o'clock at night felt like a punishment she did not deserve, especially tonight, with the deadline breathing down her neck. The grocery store had long closed. Her new apartment, where she had moved exactly 1 week ago, was still a wilderness of unopened cardboard boxes. Everything she needed was either lost somewhere in the mess or still sealed behind layers of stubborn tape. Her options were painfully limited. Endure a cup of coffee as bitter as medicine, or do what normal people in normal apartment buildings supposedly did, knock on a neighbor's door. She stood in the doorway of her brand-new 1-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Portland, wrapped in a charcoal gray robe and wearing fuzzy corgi-face slippers that made her look like a middle-aged woman trying to survive an after-2 existential crisis. 10 at night, hair still damp from a shower, no makeup, her entire mood hanging by the fragile hope of one decent cup of coffee. She took a deep breath, locked her door, and glanced down the quiet hallway. The 3rd floor rarely saw anyone at this hour. Then she walked toward apartment 4B, where a warm light was still shining beneath the door. 3 polite knocks. Claire silently prayed that whoever lived inside wasn't a complete eccentric, or worse, someone who hated coffee and the people who came begging for sugar late at night. What she did not expect was for the door to open and reveal a tall, quiet man with the kind of presence usually reserved for Italian cologne commercials. Michael DeLuca, if she remembered the name correctly from the mailbox, stood there wearing a dark, fitted sweater that shaped itself around his broad shoulders. His black and silver hair brushed back with a few strands falling across his forehead in a way too effortlessly perfect to be accidental. His eyes, dark as red wine and just as deep, fixed on her with an unguarded flicker of surprise. Claire froze for a heartbeat, almost forgetting why she was standing there. At this hour, she looked very much like the strange lady down the hall with ridiculous corgi slippers, and in front of her stood the mysterious man who lived 3 doors away, someone she had never expected to meet in a moment of caffeine-driven desperation. And in that brief instant, what should have been an ordinary errand for sugar quietly shifted into the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. A small thread of connection strong enough to unsettle the rules Claire had built around her life, and open a path she had no idea she was about to walk. Especially since the man 3 doors away was not only strikingly attractive, but carried secrets behind his calm exterior. Before we move on, tell me where you are watching from, because tonight you may find that some of the most unexpected relationships begin with nothing more than a borrowed jar of sugar and a pair of odd little corgi slippers. And before we continue to the next part of the story, if you are feeling curious or moved or simply want to follow Claire and Michael's unfolding journey, remember to subscribe, like, and share this video. Every subscription from you is the encouragement that helps us bring more heartfelt stories to life each day. And truly, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which city or country you're listening from. We would love to see how far this small story travels across the world. Thank you for being here, and now we will move gently into the next emotional chapter of Claire and Michael. Michael said nothing for the first few seconds after opening the door. He simply looked at her with an expression that held both surprise and the quiet concentration of someone studying an unexpected painting on his wall. Claire stood there, unsure how to begin. She felt heat rising across her face, from the curve of her ears to the tops of her cheeks. She became painfully aware of every detail about herself in that moment: the damp hair, the robe that did little to hide her disheveled state, and those fluffy corgi slippers with their perked-up ears at her toes. Under the warm yellow glow spilling from his apartment, Claire suddenly felt less like a 48-year-old professional woman in publishing and more like a quirky sitcom character who had just wandered into the wrong scene. But then she remembered why she was standing there, why her heart was pounding like a drum inside her chest. Sugar. She just needed some sugar. It was simple, easy to say, yet her mouth felt dry, and the words tangled somewhere in her throat. She swallowed, forced a small, polite smile, and hoped she didn't look completely pitiable. "I am sorry to bother you this late. I just moved into 3B last week and I need some sugar. Late night coffee, deadline, no sugar." She had no idea if her words made any sense. She only knew she was rambling. Michael continued watching her, never interrupting. His gaze slipped from her face to her slippers and then back to her eyes. Silence. A long enough silence for Claire to start panicking. What was he thinking? That she was odd? That no sane person knocked on doors at 10 at night wearing cartoon slippers? That she was awkwardly trying to flirt with the handsome neighbor? She opened her mouth to break the tension just as he tilted his head slightly and spoke, his voice low and husky, soft as a breeze across a still lake. "Wait here." He turned and walked inside, leaving the door resting open. Claire stood frozen, hearing her own heartbeat pulse with nervous intensity. She looked into the dim interior of his apartment, where the scent of warm wood and a faint, clean fragrance drifted toward her, making her even more self-conscious. She wondered whether she should step back or remain where she was. She was just about to lean her shoulder against the wall for balance when Michael returned. In his hand was a glass jar filled nearly to the brim with white sugar. He held it out to her. "How much do you need?" Claire reached to take it, trying not to let her fingers touch his, but they brushed anyway. His skin was warm, his hand large and steady, carrying something she could not name, something that felt both comforting and embarrassingly intimate. Just a few spoonfuls. "I will bring it back tomorrow morning, or I can buy a new bag if you prefer." He nodded. "Keep the jar. I have another one." She thought she heard the faintest suggestion of a smile in his voice. She thanked him, smiled, and reminded herself to retreat before she said anything foolish. "I am Claire Reynolds. I just moved here from Seattle. Michael. No last name. No further details. Just a single, simple word, clean and quiet, yet filled with mystery." He remained standing in the doorway, his posture relaxed, not rushing the moment, yet not prolonging it. Claire understood. She stepped back, tightening her grip on the jar as though making sure she wasn't imagining any of this. "Thank you so much. You saved my deadline. And my coffee. And my sanity. Good night." She turned away, her thoughts still tangled. But then his voice came from behind her, low and even, carrying a warmth that spread down her spine. "Good night, Claire." Just 3 words, yet the way he said them made her feel as if her name had suddenly become something soft and cherished. Claire walked slowly back to her apartment, her heartbeat still unsettled. She closed the door, leaned her back against it, and looked down at her corgi slippers. A laugh mixed with a sigh escaped her. She had just asked for sugar. In her sleepwear, wearing dog-faced slippers, from a man who looked like he had stepped out of a magazine cover, and he had wished her good night as if he genuinely meant it. She opened the jar, scooped a spoonful into her coffee, stirred gently, and watched the aroma rise. Her laptop screen waited, but her focus no longer belonged to the manuscript. Instead, her thoughts drifted toward that voice, those eyes, and the man who lived 3 doors down, Michael, the man who had given her sugar, and made this night far stranger and far more unforgettable than she ever expected. 3 days later, Claire found herself standing at the door of apartment 4B again, this time not to ask for sugar but to offer a more proper thank you. In her hands she carried a round silver tin. Inside were homemade chocolate chip cookies still faintly warm from the oven that morning. She had gone back and forth about this since the day before, torn between pretending nothing had happened and walking down the hall to express her gratitude in a way that felt right. In the end, her sense of thankfulness, along with something else she did not quite want to name yet, something that kept pulling her thoughts back to those dark eyes and that low, warm voice, finally won out. Claire was dressed far more neatly than she had been the last time. Dark jeans, a soft light gray turtleneck sweater, hair completely dry and brushed smooth, and no corgi slippers. Instead, she wore simple brown ankle boots. She drew a deep breath and knocked 3 times, just as she had before. A part of her hoped he would not be home. Another part hoped he would open the door. And then the door did open. Michael stood there, this time in a charcoal hand-knit sweater and black jeans, his hair slightly damp, as if he had just stepped out of the shower. He did not look surprised, and he did not look distant. He simply looked at her for the span of a breath, and then his gaze softened the way autumn wind moves gently across the surface of a lake. "Good morning," Claire said, her voice barely more than a wisp of steam. "I brought you some cookies to say thank you. For the sugar the other day." She held out the tin, her hands a little tense but her smile steady. Michael took it, opened the lid, and looked inside. "Chocolate chip." She nodded. "I bake when I am stressed. Yesterday an author refused to revise his manuscript for the 3rd time. I was so frustrated I had to do something with the oven." One of his brows lifted very slightly. "Stress baking. I have heard of it. but I have never seen the result in person. Try one, Claire urged, her smile now a little more natural. He took a cookie and bit into it, chewing slowly. His expression did not change much, but something around his mouth seemed to soften. Good, he said. Only good. She pretended to be offended. I need a more detailed assessment than that. Very good. The balance between crisp and soft is just right. The sweetness is perfect. Claire let out a quiet laugh. Thank you. I knew they would turn out if I got the temperature exactly right. I checked it with my own thermometer. Michael nodded as if the fact that she owned a separate thermometer just for her oven was a serious detail worth recording. I may have to ask for more if I have another bad day. He studied her for a moment, head tipped slightly, his faint smile genuine. I will keep a jar ready. Claire laughed, the edge of her nervousness easing away. He seemed like the kind of man who did not say much, but every word he did offer opened a small window into something more. She was beginning to feel more at ease standing at his doorway, no longer like the woman who had knocked in the middle of the night asking for sugar. Actually, she said, I was not sure this was the right way to say thank you, but it felt wrong not to. You were kind that night, and I wanted to. She stopped herself, realizing she was about to say too much, as she often did when she was anxious. Michael simply nodded. I understand, and I remember. Claire tilted her head, surprised. Remember? He glanced down at her feet, then back up at her face. It was coffee at 10 at night, a deadline closing in, and coffee without sugar is a punishment no one deserves. Claire stared for a second and then burst into a warm laugh. You actually remember every word I said. Michael gave a small shrug, and a brief glimmer of something unreadable moved through his eyes. I notice small things, especially when someone is standing at my door in corgi slippers. Claire lifted a hand to cover her mouth, unable to hold back her smile. Oh no, please do not mention those slippers ever again. They were charming, very distinctive. She shook her head, her cheeks flushing. I will never wear them outside again, I swear. Michael shifted slightly, leaning one shoulder against the doorframe, the cookie tin balanced easily in one hand, the other arm folded loosely across his chest. I hope I get to taste more cookies. With or without those slippers, either way is fine. Claire thanked him once more, offered a goodbye, and turned to go. This time her steps felt lighter. It was not just the relief of having done the courteous thing, but a quiet, unfamiliar feeling that had begun to stir inside her. Something without a name yet, perhaps a deepening curiosity, perhaps a gentle sense of anticipation, or perhaps simply the warmth of knowing someone had truly listened and remembered the small, throwaway things she had said, and that someone lived only 3 doors away. Claire had no intention of becoming the kind of neighbor who conveniently appeared in the hallway too often, but from the day she brought the cookies over, it was as if the entire building had begun arranging its own private script so that she and Michael crossed paths again and again. The first time after the tin of cookies was on a Tuesday morning in the elevator, when she was rushing off to meet a client downtown. As the door slid open and she stepped in, she saw him already there. He wore a white shirt and a gray tie, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows as he checked something on his phone. When he noticed her, he looked up, nodded, and the corner of his mouth softened into a thin smile, like sunlight pushing through mist. Claire only had time to nod back, and then they stood side by side in the small moving box, the hum of the machinery around them, the faint trace of his cologne in the air tugging at her attention. She stared at the floor numbers climbing one by one, saying nothing. He stayed silent too. Yet the space between them did not feel awkward. It carried a sense of something ripening slowly, as though something was taking shape that both of them could feel, even if neither spoke of it. The next day it was in the parking garage, when she was wrestling with the lid of the recycling bin that refused to close. Michael appeared, espresso cup in hand, moving with his usual unhurried calm. He did not say a word at first, just stepped up beside her and closed the lid with one easy motion, firm and efficient, before lifting the cup back to his lips. Claire murmured a thank you. He nodded, that almost permanent suggestion of a smile, lingering at the edge of his mouth. By the third time, it no longer felt like coincidence. She stepped into the elevator at 6 p.m. on Friday, after a long day of editing, and he was already there. This time he wore a navy V-neck sweater, his hair slightly tousled, his eyes meeting hers directly as the doors closed. There was no quick greeting and no polite nod. There was only that gaze, deep and steady, and Claire almost forgot which button she had pressed. He spoke first. "The cookies last week were very good." She let out a soft laugh. "I am glad you liked them. I only hope you do not have too many bad days just to get more." Michael tilted his head, and a brief light moved through his eyes, gone almost as soon as it appeared. If more bad days mean more cookies, that is not entirely a tragedy. Claire felt her heart skip a beat. She was not quite sure how to respond to that kind of easy, almost playful remark coming from a man who otherwise kept such careful distance. But then, his gaze moved across her face and paused for half a second, long enough for her to understand that it was no longer just the neutral look of a neighbor. It was the look of someone who had begun to care. He did not say it, and he did not use many words, but eyes have never been good at lying, and she had to admit to herself that she had started to look forward to these encounters too. They no longer felt accidental. They felt like something she was quietly hoping for. Each time she stepped into the hallway, she found herself glancing toward the door of 4B. Each time the elevator doors opened, her heart gave a small, quick thud as she waited to see if his familiar figure would be there. And sometimes, even the simple sound of a door closing somewhere along the corridor made her think of that low voice. Everything between them remained gentle and quiet, with no declarations, no obvious signals, only glances, brief meetings, and a fragile atmosphere that seemed to grow fuller, deeper, like the surface of a still lake widening in circles after a small stone breaks the water. From deep within herself, Claire knew this was no longer some random joke of the universe. Something was moving toward her, slow but sure. And she was moving toward it too, carefully, quietly, but without stepping back. Claire had always considered herself someone who knew her limits. She had lived alone for more than 10 years, learned how to balance work and life, learned how to carry 3 grocery bags in one hand while keeping a cup of coffee steady in the other without spilling a drop. But that day, for a reason she could not quite explain, she tried to haul everything from the supermarket up to her apartment in a single trip: 2 large paper bags filled to the top, a carton of eggs, a small bouquet of flowers, and a paper bag filled with freshly roasted coffee. When she stepped into the elevator, Claire felt like she was managing a miniature circus act, fighting to maintain balance as the elevator trembled slightly when the doors closed. She had just managed to press the button for the 3rd floor with her elbow when she sensed someone else step in. Michael. Of course. He wore a charcoal gray shirt, with the sleeves rolled up the way they always were, and the moment he saw her, he paused, as if taking a quick inventory of the situation. She offered a smile, slightly strained, and spoke first. "I am fine. I have this under control." She even tilted her head back to flip her hair as if proving how calm she was, but then the bag on her left side began to slip. 1 second later, the small disaster happened. One of the paper bags split open from the bottom, sending 3 apples rolling across the elevator floor, a container of cream cheese skidding a short distance, and the carton of eggs sliding dangerously away. Claire dropped into a crouch on instinct, reaching for the eggs before they could break, but one apple rolled out of reach. Michael crouched at the round, same time, quicker, steadier. He caught the egg carton, retrieved every apple, and placed everything carefully into the remaining intact bag. Claire felt her face heat with embarrassment. "I said I had it under control. It seems I may have spoken too soon." He did not laugh, but his gaze softened. He kept silent as he helped her back up, one hand still holding the bag for her. She reached for it, but he stepped out of the elevator first as the doors opened on the 3rd floor. "I will carry it. 3B, right." Claire nodded and followed him, but when they reached her door, she fumbled through her coat pocket and realized her keys were missing. "I think I left them in my handbag, which is probably still on the elevator floor." Michael did not say anything. He simply turned and walked back without waiting for a request. 2 minutes later, he returned with her bag and the silver key with a little owl keychain. Claire exhaled in relief, thanking him repeatedly as she unlocked the door. The apartment was still far from fully settled. Boxes remained stacked in the corners. A few paintings still leaned against the wall waiting to be hung. The kitchen counter freshly wiped just the day before. Michael stepped inside after she invited him, setting the groceries gently on the counter. He looked around, not judging, only observing quietly as though committing the space to memory. "Just moved in, right?" Claire nodded. 1 week ago, still organizing. I need to find time between meetings." Michael opened his mouth as if to say something, but chose not to. His eyes fell on the bouquet of flowers in the bag. He reached for it and handed it to her. "You should get these in water soon." Claire took them, a flicker of surprise passing across her face. "Thank you. I was thinking I could leave them there for a few hours, but you are right. I should not." She placed the flowers in a vase, trying to hide the flutter rising in her chest. Michael stepped toward the door, one hand in his pocket. As he opened it, he turned back. "Next time you need help, just knock. I am home more often than you think." Claire could only manage a soft thank you as she watched him walk down the hallway, his tall, steady frame moving with a quiet familiarity she had not yet grown used to. She closed the door, leaned against the wall, and let out a long breath. She was not sure what unsettled her more, the fact that she had dropped her groceries in front of him, or the fact that he knew exactly where she lived, kept that detail to himself until the moment he needed to step in, and then walked away as if nothing unusual had happened. But clearly, for Claire, nothing about these encounters felt ordinary anymore, and she knew she had begun to think of him as more than the neighbor in 4B. Claire did not see Michael for the next 3 days after the elevator incident, and she kept telling herself not to read too much into it. He could be busy, he could be traveling, he could be both, but no matter the reason. She could not deny the faint hope that surfaced every time she stepped into the hallway or pressed the elevator button. She told herself it was harmless. Just a small curiosity, a gentle fondness, nothing more. Until Friday evening, when she returned home after a long day negotiating with 3 different partners about the rights to an upcoming novel, her feet aching from new shoes, her head throbbing from a video meeting that had dragged on for nearly 2 hours, her whole being longing for a hot shower and something simple to eat. As she fumbled with her keys, Michael's voice rose behind her, low and smooth like a cool stream. "Claire." She turned, startled. He stood a few steps away, wearing a thin black sweater beneath a long coat, holding a small paper bag as though returning from an errand. "I was going to knock later," he said, pausing as if gauging her reaction. Claire nodded lightly, trying to hide the surprise and the faint tremor in her chest. "Is something wrong? I wanted to ask you something. If you are free tomorrow evening, I would like to invite you to dinner. At my place. I will cook." Claire needed half a second to absorb the meaning. A dinner invitation. At his home. Cooked by him. In another world, this might have been nothing more than a polite gesture from a considerate neighbor, but in the charged quiet that had been building between them, shaped by each shared glance and each word left unspoken, the invitation carried a deeper weight, a skipped heartbeat, a moment of stillness. Claire tried to steady her voice. "Do you mean a friendly dinner? Or a date?" Michael did not look away. His gaze held hers, serious but never imposing. "Call it whatever you want. But I think we both know it is not simply dinner between neighbors." "No, it is not," Claire whispered, then nodded. "Yes, I am free. Good. 7 o'clock. I will make something simple Italian. Do you prefer red wine or white?" "Red, if possible," he nodded. "I will choose a good bottle." Claire opened her door, her hand trembling, thanked him, and wished him good night. When the door closed behind her, she leaned against it, feeling exactly as she had the first night she asked him for sugar, except now it was not because of caffeine or a deadline, but because of an invitation that could very well change the entire course of whatever existed between them. The next morning she worked for hours, though she could not keep her focus entirely steady. She checked her schedule, answered emails, then stood in front of her closet far longer than necessary. It was not an official date, but it was not a date either. She wanted to look put together without appearing to try too hard, natural but with intention. She settled on a long plum-colored knit dress, simple and warm, fitting the early winter chill. At 6:57, she knocked on the door of 4B. The door opened almost immediately. The scent of butter, black pepper, and parmesan drifted out with the warm air inside. Michael smiled. "Right on time. I respect time. And food." He stepped aside. "Please come in." Claire walked in, seeing his apartment for the first time. Soft lighting, muted colors, clean to the point of precision, yet not cold. On the small table by the window, 2 wine glasses were already filled, next to a plate of cheese for starters. Michael moved back to the kitchen, stirring a pan of sauce, the aroma rising richly. "Welcome to Italian night. I am making pasta cacio e pepe. It sounds simple, but it takes technique." Claire smiled, stepping closer. And she could not help thinking that if this truly was the beginning of something, then perhaps the entire story had started the moment she knocked on his door for sugar. And now here they were, standing in the same kitchen, cooking together, waiting to see what might unfold next. Claire sat down at the small dining table by the window, where the soft yellow light pooled over the dark wooden surface, and the 2 glasses of red wine caught the glow, turning it into a muted ribbon of ruby. She let her gaze travel around the apartment for the first time, with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Everything in this space carried the imprint of quiet taste, precision, and restraint, very much like the man who lived here. Nothing was excessive, yet nothing felt cold. A few black and white photographs hung on the walls, images of old European streets that looked, to her, like they might be somewhere in Italy. A semi-automatic coffee machine sat beside a small wine rack where the bottles were arranged according to height and label, giving her the distinct sense that this was a man who lived with discipline and a certain refinement. In the kitchen, Michael was still gently tossing the pasta in the pan, his movements smooth and practiced, like a professional chef's. He did not talk much, but every motion had a quiet certainty, a calm that seemed to settle over the room. Claire rose from her chair and walked closer. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Michael glanced at her, a flicker of seriousness and playful intent in his eyes. "Not the first time. Just watch. Next time I will let you stir the sauce." "Next time." Claire lifted an eyebrow, her smile impossible to hide. He did not answer, only tilted his head slightly as if to acknowledge that she had asked the question, and he intended to keep it for later. After a few more minutes, he turned off the stove and carefully plated the pasta onto 2 white porcelain dishes before carrying them to the table. The scent of black pepper, butter, and parmesan melted into the air, mingling with the smell of wood and wine, wrapping the room in a warmth that felt strangely intimate. Claire sat down, picked up her fork, and looked at him. "Am I about to judge a treasured family recipe? You will be judged if you do not finish it." His reply was solemn, but there was a glint of teasing in his eyes. She laughed softly and twirled a forkful of pasta. The noodles had just the right bite. The sauce was as smooth as cream without being heavy, the heat of the pepper distinct yet perfectly balanced. She lifted her gaze, honest and unguarded. "It is wonderful. This is the simplest and best pasta I have ever tasted." Michael nodded slightly, accepting the compliment with satisfaction, but without any hint of vanity. They ate slowly, their conversation drifting through small stories, most of them coming from Claire. She talked about difficult authors, about manuscripts that were sent back for revision, a 6th, even a 7th time, only to return again with pages of notes as long as a thesis. Michael listened without interrupting, only nodding now and then, or adding a brief remark that made her laugh. After the meal, he poured more wine, then came back to the table with a faint sideways smile. "Ready for your first Italian lesson?" Claire chuckled, shaking her head lightly. "I knew there was going to be a lesson, but I am still not prepared." He sat down across from her and set his glass on the table. "You do not need to prepare, you just need to listen and repeat. Let us begin." "Buonasera." Claire frowned, trying to shape the sounds. "Buo, na, Sara." He shook his head, still smiling. "Buonasera," emphasis on the say. "Buonasera." She tried again, and this time it was closer. He nodded. "Good. It means good evening. Next, come stai." Claire echoed him with mangled vowels and misplaced consonants, but he did not laugh. He simply patiently corrected each sound, each little stress, as if there were all the time in the world. In the space of 10 small minutes, she managed to learn 3 basic phrases and discovered that her pronunciation was worse than she had imagined. But she also found herself laughing far more than she had expected. When the room finally settled back into quiet, they sat facing each other, their eyes holding just a moment longer than would have been usual. Claire felt her heartbeat slowing, but not out of calm. It was the stillness that falls when everything around you seems to step back, leaving only one presence in sharp focus. Michael set his glass down and leaned forward slightly, not rushing, not pressing, only moving with a deliberate clarity. "Claire," he said softly, "If I kiss you now, will you object?" She did not answer immediately. She simply looked at him, then gave the faintest shake of her head. So he leaned in closer, hesitated for the span of a breath as if to make absolutely sure, and then his mouth touched hers, gentle, very gentle, not insistent, not demanding. Only a whisper in the language of touch, a quiet confirmation that everything that had passed silently between them these last days was real. Claire closed her eyes and met his kiss, feeling his hand brush her cheek in a tender, unhurried gesture. When he drew back, she opened her eyes and found him watching her. The first true smile of the evening had settled at the corner of his mouth. "Buona notte," he murmured. Claire smiled back, her cheeks still warm. "Buona notte." And for the first time in a very long while, she knew she would not need coffee to stay awake that night, because that kiss had awakened her in an entirely different way. Claire did not tell anyone about that kiss. She did not mention it to Janet, her best friend back in Seattle, and she did not write it in the notebook where she usually recorded the important things that happened each day. She kept it for herself, as if by doing so she could keep the memory safe, untouched by other people's opinions or labels or overthinking. Everything that followed unfolded as naturally as a slow river. Michael did not text, and he did not knock on her door the next day, but when they crossed paths in the hallway on Monday afternoon, his eyes held the same warmth that eased something inside her. He simply asked if she had had a good workday. She said she had, and they parted with a smile. It was all very gentle, very much in step with the rhythm that had been growing between them. Then Claire began to notice things that were not quite strange, but not entirely ordinary either. One evening, as she was watering the plants out on her balcony, she heard a low male voice speaking Italian from the direction of Michael's apartment. His living room window was slightly open, light spilling through the curtain. Claire did not try to listen, but the tone of the voice, rapid and harsh, made her hand pause in midair. Then she heard Michael's voice in answer, lower and calmer, also in Italian. There were no loud bangs, no sound of anything breaking, but the air felt drawn tight as a string. After a while the window closed. The lights dimmed. She stepped back inside and sank into a chair, feeling as if something had passed just beyond her line of sight, something she could not yet name. Another time, in the middle of the week, she left her apartment early for a morning meeting. When the elevator doors slid open, two men she had never seen before were already inside. Both wore black suits and polished leather shoes, carrying no bags and no folders. They looked at her for the briefest moment, then shifted slightly to give her space. No one spoke. When Claire pressed the button for the lobby, she noticed that the button for the 4th floor was already glowing. As far as she knew, no one lived on the 4th floor anymore, not since the elderly couple had moved out a month earlier. When the elevator stopped on the 3rd floor and she stepped out, she turned just in time to see the doors sliding shut. The two men remained motionless, their eyes fixed straight ahead. They did not look like residents. They did not have the quiet, lived-in air of people who called this calm Portland building home. They carried something else, something colder. Claire brushed off the feeling for the rest of the day, until that evening, when she returned with a bag of takeout in her hand and stepped into the elevator, only to feel it shudder and freeze briefly between floors, the light flashing at the 2nd floor before it slowly began to move again. She was not superstitious, and she was not easily rattled, but a series of small details kept stacking up. A man in a long coat standing outside the building, smoking but never going in. Short, clipped telephone conversations in Italian that Michael ended the moment he saw her approach. The times he answered a simple question of hers with a smile instead of words. Claire did not want to be suspicious. She was not someone who liked to imagine worst-case scenarios. Yet her instincts, the same instincts that had kept her from signing the wrong contract or choosing the wrong author more than once, began tapping lightly at the back of her mind. Something was not entirely in harmony with the picture she thought she had. Michael was a courteous, composed man who cooked beautifully, loved good wine, and owned a coffee machine so handsome it made her jealous. But he was also a man whose eyes were sharper than most, who had the habit of scanning his surroundings like someone always quietly on guard, and whose visitors never seemed to smile. Claire could not help wondering if she had stepped into a story whose setting she did not yet fully understand. And if that were true, what was she supposed to do? Keep walking forward, or stop and ask directly? Then she remembered the look in his eyes, his patience as he guided her through each Italian word, and that first kiss, unhurried and gentle and carefully measured. Perhaps it was still too early to draw any conclusions, yet there was no denying that she was no longer simply living in a quiet apartment building in Portland. She was standing near a door that had not fully opened, and on the other side of it lay a world she had never known. Claire had never intended to follow Michael. Truthfully, she had tried not to give too much weight to the strange signs she had noticed before, telling herself that everyone had private corners of their lives that did not need explaining, and she had no right to demand answers simply because he had cooked her a dinner and given her a kiss that had made her heart skip. But that afternoon, when she returned from a meeting on the west side of the city, a bag of freshly roasted coffee from her favorite little shop in hand, she saw something that made her steps slow almost instinctively. Near the front of the building, right by the neatly trimmed row of low shrubs, Michael was standing with two men. They were not wearing suits, but they carried the same stiff, uneasy refinement of people trying to hide something. One wore a baseball cap, the other dark sunglasses, even though the sun had already slipped behind the buildings. Michael did not see her. He was speaking, his voice low and even. Claire could not make out the words, but the cadence was unmistakably close to the tense negotiations she had witnessed in meeting rooms. This was not a conversation between friends. The man in sunglasses had his arms crossed, leaning forward as though laying down terms. The other nodded every so often, his gaze fixed unblinking on Michael. No one smiled. No one looked relaxed. Their postures were tight, as if the smallest wrong nod might cause everything to erupt. Claire did not move closer. She stood half hidden behind a maple tree, clutching the coffee bag against her chest, her heart beginning to beat faster, as though her body sensed danger long before her mind could name it. Michael said something else in Italian, slow and deliberate. The man in sunglasses curled one corner of his mouth and responded with a short phrase. The air seemed to tighten another notch. Michael did not back away, nor did he soften. His posture remained straight, shoulders open, his gaze cooling in a way that shocked her compared to the man who had once gently sliced cheese for her and corrected her Italian pronunciation with patient warmth. Claire had never seen that face of his before. It was not anger. It was authority, control, and something darker than anything she had ever glimpsed in him. Then, like a closing move on a chessboard, Michael spoke one final sentence, short and decisive. The man in the cap glanced at the other, and both of them nodded once, simultaneously, offering no further words. They turned, walked to a black car, parked a few yards away, got in, and drove off without looking back. Michael remained still for several seconds after the car disappeared, then lifted a hand to loosen his collar, drawing in a deep breath as if shaking off something heavy that had settled inside him. At that exact moment, he turned, his gaze sweeping the small parking area and landing on Claire's. For a heartbeat, they both stood frozen. No words, no movement, only the thick silence between them, weighted with everything unspoken. Michael was the one who walked toward her, not quickly, but without hesitation. Claire did not step back, nor did she look away. She tightened her grip on the coffee bag and held his gaze, her heart thundering inside her chest. When he reached her, his voice dropped, rough and low like wind brushing across thin sand. "How much did you see?" Claire swallowed. Enough to know that was not a normal conversation. Michael nodded once, his eyes still on her face, but the sharpness from earlier had dimmed. He exhaled, one hand braced at his hip, the other lifting briefly to the back of his neck as if weighing a decision. "Do you want to come up to my apartment?" he asked. "We should talk." Claire did not answer right away, but then she nodded. She was not ready for everything she had just witnessed, but she knew that if she did not take another step, if she did not hear him say these things clearly, she would never be able to look at him the same way again. And there was something in his eyes, something in the way he did not excuse anything or run from it, that made her believe the truth was still waiting to be opened. Michael's apartment looked the same as the first time Claire had stepped inside, softly lit, orderly in a way that made time feel slower within its walls. But this time there was no scent of butter or pepper, no wine waiting on the table, no quiet jazz drifting from hidden speakers, only a hush that seemed to deepen the tension neither of them bothered to mask. Michael set his keys down on the counter, poured each of them a glass of whiskey without asking, and Claire sat on the sofa, the cold glass between her fingers making her hands feel numb. She said nothing, asked nothing. She waited. Michael leaned against the kitchen counter, his gaze lowered as though choosing each word carefully. When he lifted his eyes, the softness she had grown used to was absent. Something deeper, heavier, more forthright had settled there. "Claire," he began, "what you saw today is real. Not a misunderstanding, not a movie, and not something I can deny or hide anymore." She nodded faintly, urging him to go on. He drew in a long breath, as if peeling away a layer of armor he had carried for years. "My family came from Sicily, first-generation immigrants arriving in America at the start of the last century. My great-grandfather laid the foundation, my grandfather expanded it, and my father kept the organization from falling into chaos through decades of scattered turf wars in New York." Claire did not interrupt. Her heart beat slowly but steadily, as though she were crossing a narrow bridge suspended over a truth she had never imagined. Michael continued, his voice steady, stripped of pride or shame. "The one who leads the organization now is my brother, Vincent, and I am the second in command." He did not call it the Mafia, he called it the organization. A tightly structured system, operating under its own rules, with principles, boundaries, and a reality far removed from the caricatures of Hollywood films. They did not traffic drugs, they did not traffic people, they avoided spilling blood, unless cornered without options. But, he admitted, they controlled territory, they collected dues, they maintained order in the shadows where the law did not always reach. Claire set her glass down and clasped her hands in her lap. She felt herself drifting into a quiet weightlessness as the pieces she had noticed: strange men, Italian conversations, the cool alertness in Michael's gaze, each settled into their rightful place. "And you, Michael?" she asked softly, her voice steady but threaded with emotion. "What do you do in that organization?" He held her eyes, not avoiding, not polishing the truth. "I am the one who makes sure everything runs the way it should. Sometimes that means negotiating, sometimes deciding, sometimes stopping consequences before they get out of hand." Claire closed her eyes for a few seconds, letting out a slow breath. She was not afraid. Strangely, there was no trembling urge to flee. What she felt instead was shock at the sheer distance between the man she knew, the patient teacher of Italian vowels, the quiet neighbor holding a jar of sugar at her doorway, and the world he was opening for her now. "Then why tell me all of this?" Michael remained silent for a moment, then walked over and sat across from her. The space between them narrowed to a small table. "Because I do not want you to guess anymore. I do not want you to be afraid of things you do not understand. I want you to know the truth, and if after hearing it, you choose to walk away, I will accept that. I will not stop you. But if you stay, then at least you will know what you are stepping into." Claire looked at him for a long time, her heart swaying between reason and something deeper than she had allowed herself to acknowledge. She understood that she stood at a crossroads, and though she did not yet know what she would say, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She did not want to walk away. Not now. Not when his eyes were waiting for her answer. Claire sat there for a long time, her eyes never leaving Michael's face. The face she had seen softened when he sprinkled cheese over her plate of pasta. The face she had seen drawn tight when he said nothing and only watched her in the elevator. And now the face of a man who carried within him a world she had never dared to imagine. She was not afraid. Not exactly. She was not someone who retreated easily from what she did not understand. What placed her in that strange, uncertain space was a different question entirely. How much of the man before her was the Michael she knew, and how much was a DeLuca from that other world? When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "I do not need you to tell me everything, Michael. I do not need every detail. I know there are things I should not know, but I do need one thing: the truth. If I ask, you have to answer. If I see something that makes me doubt, you cannot let me go looking for the answer on my own. No hiding, no distraction. I can live with the truth, but I cannot live with silence." Michael nodded, his eyes steady and unblinking, as if he had been hoping she would say exactly this. He reached his hand toward her, not touching yet, simply opening his palm in the space between them like a silent promise. "I will not hide anything from you again. If you ask, I will answer. And if anything comes that might put you in danger, you will know before you even have time to suspect it." Claire looked at that hand for a moment, then placed her own in it, her fingers closing between his. I am not going anywhere, she whispered. I do not know how to be in a relationship with a background as complicated as this, but I know one thing very clearly. I do not want to leave. Michael tightened his grip around her hand, as if that simple movement was the only thing keeping him from being swallowed by worry and regret. He looked at her as if this was the first time anyone had seen him completely, without armor, without polish, and still chosen to stay. He let out a breath that sounded like a weight lifting from his chest. You just did something most people could not do, Claire. You saw all of me and you stayed. She smiled, tired but sincere. Then now it is your turn. You will tell me what happens if I truly step into your life. Everything. The rules, the boundaries, the places I should avoid, the things I should keep silent about, the situations I must never interfere with. I need to know enough so that I am not the weak one just because I do not know where I am standing. He nodded, this time without a trace of hesitation. I will tell you. Slowly, piece by piece, when it is time, but it will always be the truth. Claire leaned back, her eyes drifting to the ceiling, her heart still rippling but no longer afraid. She knew she had crossed a line. There was no turning back, but she did not want to anyway. When she turned her head and saw Michael still looking at her as if he could not quite believe she was truly there, she squeezed his hand again and spoke softly, but with quiet resolve. We are going to do this our way, not the way the outside world does it, not the way you have seen or done things before. We will have our own rules, and the first rule is this: honesty and safety. With each other. With everything. Michael tilted his head and pressed a kiss to the back of her hand, so light it felt like a vow. With you, I can do that. Claire closed her eyes for a moment to let the warmth of his lips sink into her skin, then opened them again with a small smile. Then we start tonight. No more hiding. You are Michael DeLuca. I am Claire Bennett. And this is our story. Not perfect, not simple, but real, and worth holding on to. They sat in Michael's living room until close to midnight, the main lights off, only the soft golden pool from a table lamp spilling across the rug, the two of them surrounded by a quiet that was not heavy but full, as if the entire world had slowed down to make space for them to negotiate something that was not just love, but the building of something sturdy even though its foundation lay across two very different worlds. Claire rested lightly against the side of the chair, her hand still in Michael's, her gaze fixed on him with the seriousness she usually reserved for meetings with difficult investors. We need to be clear, she said, not just so that I can feel safe, but so that you do not feel you have to hide anything. Michael nodded, the lamplight glinting in his eyes like dark glass. Go on, Claire, I am listening. The first rule, she said, is truth. If I ask, you answer. Whatever it is, even if I might not like what I hear. You promise you will not hide things from me. He nodded without a pause. Agreed. And if you see something coming that could affect me, you have to tell me right away, not let me wander into anything without knowing what is happening. Safety, she repeated, is not negotiable. I do not need you to tell me every detail of your work. I am not part of the organization, but I am part of your life, and I need to know when I should be careful. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze, his thumb brushing the back of her fingers in a quiet reassurance. I promise. If anything happens, you will be the first person I protect. Claire was silent for a moment, then continued, her voice slowing. I have conditions too. I need space. I cannot live inside a cage of control that is too tight. I have spent years making my own decisions. If there are times when I have to pull back to think, to breathe, you have to let me do that. No following, no pressure, just trust. Michael studied her for a long time. Claire, I have never met anyone who makes me want to take off every piece of armor I have. If you need space, I will give it. If you need silence, I will wait, as long as you stay. She smiled faintly and nodded. I am staying, and we need a rule for your world too. I do not interfere. I do not pry if I am not invited. I understand there are things that are dangerous, and that silence can sometimes protect. But once you open that door and let me step inside, that also means you are letting me see more of who you really are, not only the man who knows how to cook Italian pasta. Michael raised an eyebrow, half teasing, half serious. Are you saying I cannot rely on my cooking skills alone to keep you? Claire's laugh was soft, her eyes touched with tenderness. No, you need more than that. You need truth, trust, And a little patience when I ask you 10 times how to say one Italian word and still get it wrong." Michael leaned in and brushed a light kiss across her forehead, a brief touch that nevertheless felt decisive. "All right, then it is settled. Honesty, no hiding. Safety, respecting space. And if anything changes, we speak it aloud before it breaks." Claire rested her head on his shoulder and drew in a deep breath full of oak and the gentle cologne she now knew well enough that it could calm her simply by being there. "Agreement sealed," she whispered. Michael's arm tightened around her. "Agreement sealed. And no matter how many masks the world outside might wear, no matter how many gray zones lay between right and wrong, inside this small space one thing was certain: they would keep walking forward, not as two people shaken by a newly revealed secret, but as two people willing to write their own rules in a life where no one else could decide for them. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Claire curled into the armchair by the window, a cup of coffee warming her hands and her laptop resting lightly on her knees, and Michael walked into her apartment the way he did now, without knocking, because he had a key, just as she had one to his place. He sat beside her, took her cup, tasted a sip, and set it back down, and the look in his eyes made Claire close her laptop at once. He had something to say, and she knew him well enough to sense it. He watched her for a moment, choosing his words with care, then spoke in a slow, steady voice. "Are you free this Sunday?" She nodded, tilting her head. "Why?" He hesitated for a beat, then said, "I want you to come with me to Brooklyn. Dinner with my family." Claire sat up straight. The DeLuca family. She had heard pieces of his stories, glimpses of people who seemed to belong to a world she still could not fully picture. His mother, Rosa DeLuca, a sharp, formidable Sicilian woman, respected by allies and feared by rivals. His brother Vincent, the current head of the family. His younger brother Luca, the mediator. His sister Gianna, brilliant and private. Claire did not know if she was ready, but she knew one thing. If Michael had invited her, it meant he now saw her as part of that world, a real part. She looked at him, careful not to reveal the nervous flutter rising in her chest. "I will go." He exhaled, the slightest easing of weight in his shoulders. "They will love you," he said, though his voice carried a shade of uncertainty. "They are particular people, especially my mother. But if you are the woman I have chosen, they will respect that." Claire gave him a small smile. "I am not expecting to be loved right away. I just hope they will not judge me too harshly in the first 5 minutes." He laughed, a real laugh, the first of the morning. "Then you have 3 minutes, because my mother sees through people in less time than that." Claire shot him a look, but kept smiling. He brushed her hair back lightly, his voice dipping lower. "I do not bring people home, Claire. Ever. Sunday dinner is tradition. Whoever sits at that table is someone the family either accepts or never speaks of again." She took his hand, their fingers weaving together. "I cannot promise to be perfect, but I can promise to be myself, and I trust you enough to walk into that house, even with shaky steps." Michael leaned down and kissed her forehead in a silent thank you. That dinner would not be simple. It would not be just pasta and wine. It was a test, a first introduction carrying the weight of a quiet declaration. Claire knew it, and she still chose to go, because if their love could survive secrets and boundaries, it could also stand before a family built on tradition and power. This Sunday, she would sit at the DeLuca family table, surrounded by people who had never heard her name before but would decide, in one evening, whether she was worthy of the man they had spent their lives protecting. And though her heart beat faster at the thought, she smiled, because she did not fear challenges. She feared not being brave enough to face them. But she was ready now, or at least ready enough to pretend until the moment arrived. Sunday came faster than Claire expected, and despite preparing herself all the night before, she felt her palms damp inside her elegant cream coat as she stood before the wrought iron gates of the DeLuca brownstone in Brooklyn. Michael walked beside her, quieter than usual, not out of worry, but out of respect for what this meant. This was not merely a family dinner. It was a silent announcement. This woman matters to me. The heavy wooden door opened after Michael rang the bell, and Claire was immediately met with the chaos of a large family. The smell of tomato sauce, garlic, and toasted bread filled the house. Children's laughter mixed with the clatter of pans, and voices rose and fell in spirited waves. She had barely slipped off her coat when Michael's hand found the small of her back. My mother is in the kitchen. Come with me. Claire swallowed and followed him through the polished stone hallway into a wide kitchen where a woman stood with her back to them, chopping onions with fierce precision, as if wrestling her own emotions. Rosa DeLuca turned as Michael spoke. Mother. Rosa's eyes went straight to Claire's, a swift look that felt as though it passed right through her. There was no hug, no polite smile, only a deep, steady gaze, dark as polished stone, reminiscent of Michael's intensity. She said nothing at first, then set her knife down, wiped her hands on a linen towel, and stepped toward Claire. Claire stood straighter, not forcing a smile, not shrinking back, simply presenting herself as she was, just as she had promised. Rosa stopped before her, her eyes never wavering. You are Claire. It was not a question. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me. Rosa inclined her head slightly, her voice light but carrying unmistakable weight. Michael has never brought anyone here. Not once. Claire held her silence, waiting, not pushing. Rosa continued, her tone softening by the smallest degree. What do you do? I am an editor. I work remotely for a publishing house in Manhattan. Sometimes I represent authors in partner meetings. A fascinating job, is it? Yes, very, and often exhausting, but I love what I do. Claire did not look away. Rosa gave another small nod, acknowledging her answer. She turned back to the stove, dropped the pasta into boiling water, and spoke, without glancing over. This house is large and complicated. Not everyone can bear it, especially someone from outside. I am not here to bear it, Claire said calmly. I am here because of Michael. And if that means understanding more about this family, then I am willing to learn. This time, Rosa faced her fully, studying her not just to test her, but to truly assess her. Then she nodded again. Not long, not dramatic, just a single, decisive acknowledgement. Michael stepped closer to his mother, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Mother, could you maybe not intimidate her right away? Rosa allowed the faintest smile, small but enough to surprise him. If my son brought home a girl who only giggled and hid behind him, that would disappoint me far more. Claire let out a quiet breath. Not relief exactly, but the sensation of having cleared the first gate of an elite, formidable academy. When others entered the kitchen and the room began to fill with warmth and laughter, Claire felt the tension, ease, but she knew her true beginning in this family came when Rosa turned to her once more and asked, Do you eat spicy food? Because my lasagna tonight has Sicilian red pepper. Claire answered without hesitation. I do, and I actually like it quite a lot. Rosa looked at her again, then gave a clearer smile. Good. This family appreciates a bit of fire. And in that moment, Claire knew she had taken another step not just into a house, but into the guarded heart of a Mafia mother. After a dinner that was louder and warmer than anything Claire had ever imagined a Mafia family could be, Rosa DeLuca suddenly glanced toward her while conversation buzzed all around the long table, her expression calm but with a sharpness that went beyond ordinary curiosity. Claire, would you help me bring some tea out to the back garden? The words were gentle, but it was not really an invitation. It was a summons. Michael looked at her, as if to see whether she was all right. But Claire had already nodded, standing up to follow Rosa into the kitchen and through a side door that led to the back patio, lit by strands of soft golden lights. The air outside was quiet, filled only with the faint rustle of the wind and the light scent of lavender planted along the fence. Rosa poured tea from a ceramic pot into a cup for Claire before sitting down across from her at the wooden table, her back straight, her gaze so composed it felt as if she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Claire knew this was no longer part of the polite introduction. This was the real interrogation. Rosa lifted her cup, took a small sip, then set it back on its saucer, folding her hands together on the table in the practiced gesture of someone used to controlling the room without needing to raise her voice. Do you love him? Claire was not surprised by the way the question cut straight to the center, without pretense or decoration. She looked directly into the older woman's eyes and nodded. Yes, I love him. Not the foolish, storybook kind of love, but the kind that makes me want to understand every part of who he is, the good and the bad. Rosa did not react immediately. She kept studying Claire, not with suspicion now, but with analysis. You know he is not simple, and you know that life beside him will not be easy. Claire nodded again. I know. He has not hidden anything from me. Enough for me to understand that loving him means loving the complications that come with him, loving the darkness as well as the light. A small smile ghosted across Rosa's face, the kind that did not appear often but carried real weight when it did. There have been many women who wanted to stand beside my son. Most of them wanted the glitter they imagined, or the power they thought they could bend. But when they saw the true face of this world, they ran. I have no intention of running, Claire answered slowly. But I am not naive enough to believe I can control everything either. All I can promise is that whatever happens, I will not leave Michael just because I am afraid. I will be afraid, certainly, but I will stay. Rosa nodded, this time more deeply. Good, that is good. Because my son, for all his strength, is still a human being, and every human being needs one thing that does not move. She looked toward the house where laughter still rose from the living room, then back at Claire. He has never brought anyone here. Not because I forbade it, but because he did not trust anyone enough to open this door. The fact that he brought you means he trusts you, and if he trusts you, I will trust you. Claire felt something ease in her chest, as if some invisible knot had finally been loosened. She smiled, not in triumph, but in the quiet relief of being seen and acknowledged. Rosa lifted her teacup again, her gaze still steady on Claire. But if you hurt him, in any way, even if it is only by walking away without a word, I will be the first one to come and find you. And it will not be with a cup of tea like this. Claire did not flinch. She simply nodded, serious. I understand. And if he hurts me, in any way, I hope you will be the first one to ask him why. Rosa's laugh was low and warm, the final sign of acceptance. I like you. I like the way you speak, the way you look people in the eye. And I think you are a clever woman. Claire smiled, feeling something soft and steady bloom inside her. Thank you, not just for dinner, but for listening. Rosa rose, resting a hand lightly on Claire's shoulder before turning back toward the house. You should have another slice of my tiramisu. It is the final test. Claire laughed, standing up with her. If I have passed the tea, I doubt your tiramisu will be the thing that defeats me. But in her heart, she knew the hardest part was already behind her. She had been approved, not with grand declarations, but with the quiet warming of a woman who could see both the fear and the courage in her eyes. From that private conversation in the back garden, everything shifted into a new chapter for Claire. When the two women walked back into the living room, she could feel the difference at once. No one said anything, but the atmosphere had changed. The silent measuring looks from cousins and siblings, the quiet scrutiny from the brothers around the table had eased. In their place were louder laughs, more relaxed nods, and invitations for another slice of cake or another glass of wine that felt like genuine hospitality rather than another round of testing. Michael came over, his eyes searching her face with gentle concern. Claire gave the smallest nod, just enough for him to know that everything was all right, better than all right. He smiled and reached for her hand, and she let him take it as naturally as taking a breath. For the rest of the night, Claire sat beside Michael as if she had always belonged in that space at the DeLuca table. She played with his young nieces and nephews, listened to Vincent, the eldest brother, tell stories of their years in Sicily in a voice that carried both gravity and humor, and watched Gianna argue heatedly with Luca over which one of them held the truly authentic version of their grandmother's sauce recipe. The kitchen was a beautiful chaos. 4 people at once arguing over who had opened which pot, voices rising over whose fault it was that one tray of bread had burnt around the edges. Claire leaned against the counter, laughing until tears gathered in her eyes, not because anything was hilariously funny, but because she felt, with a deep and quiet certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Dinner stretched on until close to midnight, when the children began dozing off in chairs, and a few of the adults drifted into a boisterous poker game. Rosa poured Claire another glass of wine and placed it in her hand without a word, only a tender look and a light pat on her shoulder that said more clearly than anything, "From now on, you are family." Michael leaned against the doorway, hands tucked into his pockets, his gaze following Claire throughout the evening, as if he still could not quite believe she was here, that she had truly chosen to stay. When their eyes met, no words were needed. They both understood that something essential had changed. She was no longer the woman 3 doors down, or the strange neighbor in a dark shirt. In the loud, complicated world of the DeLuca family, They had found a quiet place of peace in each other. Before they left, as Claire helped Gianna stack the last of the dishes, Rosa came over once more and said quietly, "Next Sunday, come a little earlier. I want you to help me with the gnocchi." It was not an invitation, it was a statement. And Claire smiled without a trace of hesitation. "Of course. You can trust my hands, even if the flour ends up all over my clothes." Rosa laughed, fuller and warmer now, and in that moment Claire realized that what surprised her almost as much as Michael himself was the fact that one day she would find herself calling a Mafia matriarch by a name as simple and affectionate as mother, and mean it with real closeness and respect. And deep inside her, the feeling of belonging had never been clearer. 6 months after the night Claire stood in Rosa DeLuca's kitchen rolling each piece of gnocchi under the older woman's watchful yet unexpectedly gentle eye, her relationship with Michael was no longer something new or fragile. They had lived through quiet days and restless nights, the kind when Michael's phone rang at 2 a.m, when Claire heard brief, clipped exchanges in Italian through a half-open door, when she learned to trust the truth he had been brave enough to give her from the beginning. Every Monday morning meant coffee at Claire's place, every Friday evening meant pasta in Michael's apartment, and all the silences in between, all the accidental brushes in the elevator, the glances they shared as the doors opened, had settled into a rhythm so familiar it felt like breathing. Yet Claire had never moved in with him. She kept her own apartment, kept coming home to the corgi slippers by the door, remained Claire who was independent and free, but always chose to return to the man who lived 3 doors away. And Michael never once pushed her to do otherwise. That was one of the reasons she loved him more. That evening, on a weekend at the edge of autumn, Michael asked her to meet him at a small Italian restaurant tucked deep into an old Brooklyn neighborhood. The place was warm and intimate, candlelight flickering, music low and gentle, and the smell of wine and herbs seemed to embrace the air. Claire suspected nothing. They had spent many evenings like this before, but tonight Michael seemed quieter, more focused. His eyes, as always, followed her with quiet tenderness, but there was something different there too. When dessert arrived, panna cotta with berry sauce, her favorite, Michael slid the plate toward her. Instead of a silver spoon resting on the dish, nestled on the white silk of cream sat a small velvet box, as still as a secret waiting to be opened. Claire blinked, her heart missing a beat. Michael did not speak immediately. He simply opened the box. Inside lay a deep blue sapphire ring edged with small diamonds that caught the light, like a city night sky. It was not ostentatious, not showy, but just enough to make everything else around them blur at the edges. Michael looked at her, his voice low and slow, each word clear in the way he always spoke to her, without detours or disguises. "I love you, Claire. I have loved you since the first night you knocked on my door asking for sugar, in your bathrobe and the most adorable dog slippers in the world. I loved you when you had no idea who I was, when you chose to stay even after you knew that things could be dangerous. And more than anything, I love the way you are always yourself and never let go of that." Claire bit her lip, her hand tightening on the edge of the tablecloth. Michael drew a long breath and went on. "I want to marry you. I want to call you my wife, but I also understand you. You love your freedom. You love your little apartment with the white walls and the desk by the window. You need space to be yourself, to breathe, to create, to live. So I am not asking you to marry me in the traditional way. I am asking you in our way, marry me, and keep your apartment, keep living 3 doors away, and every single day, let us choose each other, willingly, not bound by walls but tied by love." Claire laughed, a sound that was half choked and half overflowing with joy. She had never hoped for anything extravagant, but his understanding of her, down to the smallest details, made her heart soften in a way she could not resist. "I never imagined marrying someone without having to give up my own place," she said softly. "But I never imagined there would be a man who understood how much that matters to me. Michael, yes, I will marry you, from my own apartment, and I will love you from 3 doors away, every day, for as long as we live." Michael took her hand and slipped the ring onto her finger as if he had done it in his dreams 100 times. When his lips brushed the back of her hand, Claire no longer heard the music or the soft hum of the restaurant, only the rush of her own heartbeat. It was a strange proposal, but it was perfect, because it was theirs, only theirs. Their wedding took place on a gentle Sunday afternoon in autumn, in a small garden hidden behind an old Brooklyn townhouse, where the maple trees were just beginning to turn and the leaves drifted down like a quiet blessing. Claire wore a simple, elegant white dress and carried a bouquet of pale blue hydrangeas with small white jasmine blossoms, her hair loosely pinned at the nape of her neck, a few strands falling softly around her face, as natural as the life she had built for herself. Michael wore a dark gray suit, a deep-toned tie, and his gaze never left her from the moment she stepped into the garden. There was no long line of bridesmaids and groomsmen, no grand aisle, no extravagant reception. They invited only those who truly mattered. The DeLuca family, a handful of Claire's closest college friends, a few trusted associates, and Marco, who stood quietly behind Michael like a shadow with eyes full of pride. Their wedding was not about display. It was about marking something sacred and private. When Claire reached him, Michael took her hand and gave a gentle squeeze, as if confirming what had been certain in his heart for a long time. They exchanged simple vows, not poetic, but heavy with meaning. Claire said she would choose him every day, not out of obligation but out of love, and Michael whispered that he would be her home, whether she wanted to live right beside him or 3 doors away. No one laughed at that, because everyone understood that this was the most important truth between them. The moment that moved everyone most deeply came when Rosa DeLuca, in an elegant black dress with a single white rose pinned at her collar, stepped forward with a microphone in her hand. The garden fell into a hush. The woman known for her severity, her authority, and her economy of words now stood before them with a warm, low voice and eyes that shone a little too brightly. She looked around, then rested her gaze on Claire seated beside Michael, their fingers intertwined, not letting go for a single second. "Today, my son is marrying a woman who once knocked on his door to ask for a little sugar." She paused, a strange light flickering in her eyes. "And it turns out, he did not just give her sugar. He gave her his heart. And in return, he received a woman whom I, a mother not easily pleased, must bow my head and admit, this one is the right one." Claire bit down on her lip as tears spilled over despite her effort to hold them back. Rosa continued, her voice no longer firm, and distant but full of feeling. "Michael, you are the son I have always been proud of, even when your choices have made me frown. But this time, you did well. Very well. Claire, from today on, you are my daughter, not my daughter-in-law, my daughter. This family is not simple. It is not easy to understand. It is rarely quiet. But you chose to stay. You chose to love it. You chose to love my boy. And for that, you have all of my respect and all of my love." Applause rippled through the garden. Claire stood and walked to Rosa without waiting for anyone to prompt her, wrapping her arms around the older woman. Rosa hesitated only a heartbeat, then returned the embrace, holding her with the solid warmth of a mother whose love did not require conditions. When Claire returned to Michael's side, he took her hand and leaned close. "You know," he murmured, "I think this is the first time my mother has ever spoken at a wedding without threatening anyone." Claire laughed through her tears, resting, her head on his shoulder and whispering back, "And I think this is the first time I have ever felt I truly belonged somewhere." They kissed before the officiant could say, "You may kiss the bride," and no one objected. Because this was Michael and Claire, the ones who broke every rule and yet were the only ones truly living according to their hearts. It was a small wedding, but the love in it was vast and almost overwhelming in its quiet strength. After the wedding, their married life looked nothing like the lives of any couple you might know, but for them it was a kind of perfection that needed no defense. They still lived in 2 separate apartments, 3 doors apart. The 12th floor remained as quiet as ever, and none of their neighbors had any idea that the couple stepping into the elevator in lazy morning robes at 7 a.m. were newlyweds. Claire kept her place, with bookshelves reaching to the ceiling, the ash-gray sofa, and the soft scent of vanilla candles. Michael kept his, minimalist space, where every detail had been considered, from the charcoal linen curtains to the Italian wine bottles lined up in soldier-straight rows in the kitchen cabinet. They called each other every morning, whether or not they had spent the night together. Messages like "coffee at my place," "bring a good mood," or "come over, I am making eggs, exactly the way you like them," were part of the daily rhythm of their unusual marriage. Claire still had evenings when she worked late into the night, sending emails to difficult clients, a cup of bitter coffee beside her when she forgot to ask Michael for sugar. "Michael, even when his work demanded the presence of a man in command, always seemed to message her at the precise moment she needed it. A simple line like, "Are you all right? If not, come over. There is wine." On days when Claire felt she needed quiet, she stayed in her own apartment, curled up under a blanket with a book until midnight, texting him only one sentence, "I need some time. Alone tonight," and he would answer, "I am right next door. When you need me, knock 3 times. On the nights Michael returned from private meetings with men in suits and tense faces, Claire did not ask, did not demand an explanation. She simply sat with him, a glass of wine between them, a favorite jazz record playing softly, until he chose to say, "It is handled. I just need you here." Sometimes an entire week would pass without them sharing a bed, not because of anger, but out of respect. Yet every Saturday night was theirs, what Claire jokingly called DeLuca night, when she went to his place to cook something new or let him prepare an elaborate Italian dish. There was music, candlelight, wine, and the two of them leaning into each other on the sofa, talking about all the small things. They called it a marriage of choice, a life in which no one owned the other, no one forced the other, but every day they chose each other again. No one outside their story could quite understand this arrangement. Claire's mother, even after several visits, still shook her head at the idea that her daughter could live only a few steps away from her husband and not feel deprived. Claire simply smiled, took Michael's hand, and said, "We are not missing anything, so we do not need to fill anything in." Happiness for them did not mean endlessly being in the same room. It meant wanting to return to one another at the end of every long day. Claire kept the corgi slippers, now worn at the soles, as a small relic of the moment everything began. Michael kept a small glass jar in his wine cabinet, holding exactly 4 spoonfuls of sugar, the only thing there no one was allowed to use, because that was how much she had asked for on that first night, and he liked to say that everything had started right there. On winter nights when snow framed the windows in white, Claire might knock on his door at 2 a.m. just to ask, "Still have any wine?" And he, sleepy or not, always smiled as he opened the door. Their marriage did not follow any familiar script, but it contained everything that mattered. Separate spaces, deliberate choice, honesty, and a love that remained very much alive. 3 doors between their homes, but only 1 heartbeat between their hearts. And every time they had to decide, they still chose each other. Every time, without the slightest hesitation. On an early winter afternoon, with the soft light sliding gently through the 12th floor window, Claire stood in her small kitchen with a warm cup of coffee in her hands, her gaze drifting toward the pale gray sky. At her feet, the old corgi slippers still rested neatly by the door, worn and thinning at the soles, yet irreplaceable in their quiet significance. In that stillness, a memory rose unbidden. She remembered that night, the night when the clock struck 10, and her mind spun with the unfinished manuscript she was racing to complete, only to discover she had run out of sugar. It had felt like such a small, foolish disaster, yet somehow it made her feel as though the entire world had conspired against her. She remembered standing in front of the mirror, taking in her own bedraggled reflection in a loose bathrobe, her hair still damp, her feet tucked into those ridiculous little dog slippers, and sighing to herself, "It's only a cup of sugar, nothing more." And then she had knocked on the door 3 apartments down, her heart caught between embarrassment and desperation. Michael had opened the door. Everything began in that moment, not in a dramatic flash of fate, not with some lightning bolt of attraction, but in a small, ordinary moment that almost felt accidental. And yet it was that accidental moment that turned into a doorway into a journey no one could have predicted. For her, love came like a spoonful of sugar in a quiet night, and in that sweetness she found not only a refined, soft-spoken man who cooked with elegance, but someone whose heart was honest, whose eyes could truly listen, and who carried an entire world beneath the charcoal suits he wore so effortlessly. Claire tightened her fingers around the warm cup and smiled. Now, after everything they had lived through together, the turbulence, the doubt, the tenderness, she could say with absolute certainty that the choice she made that night had been the best of her life. She had asked for sugar, and she had found an entire life. A life not perfect, but full of love, full of deliberate daily choice, full of honesty and respect. Perhaps life has always been that way. Sometimes the greatest things begin with the smallest details. A jar of sugar, a first smile, a dinner invitation that should have meant very little. But when the heart is open enough, when we are brave enough to take even a single step forward, the extraordinary somehow finds its way in. And dear viewer, if you are watching this, perhaps somewhere inside you is a beginning waiting for its moment too. Who knows, perhaps with a single knock, you might discover a journey you never expected. And what about you? How did this story touch you? Did it stir something in you? Have you ever lived through a moment so small it should have meant nothing, but somehow changed the shape of your entire life? We would love to hear your reflections in the comments below. Share from your heart because who knows, your story may become the inspiration someone out there needs. If you enjoyed this story, do not forget to subscribe, like, and share, so that a little warmth may reach even more people. We will continue bringing you heartfelt, human stories every day, and we hope to walk beside you as you explore the beautiful tales woven through this life. Thank you for watching until the end. May you have good health, a hopeful spirit, and days filled with peace and completeness. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.